She thumps a cane and drinks champagne. She's formidable and judgmental, but we can guarantee that she's a quintessential Lady D, but recognizes great potential. What would Danbury do?
Welcome to What Would Danbury Do, your guide to Julia Quinn's Bridgerton series from A to B. It's been almost 20 years since the world was first introduced to the beloved and bickering brunettes that make up the Bridgerton family. And with a new Netflix series on the way, we wanted to revisit the series. So whether you're a fan or brand new or wondering what the Featherington it's all about, settle in with us as we attempt to create a deeply specific book club, starting with The Duke and I. Find us on Twitter and Instagram as @BridgertonPod. Feel free to live tweet using the hashtag WWDD pod. I highlighted so much, now my highlighting means nothing.
I didn't highlight, but I put in Post-it notes with like little notes.
Oh my god.
I figure we won't get to everything.
All right, so what are we doing, Rudy? We're ready to be directed.
Well, first I'm going to do a very quick rundown of the Bridgertons for anyone new and or forgetful. Anthony is the eldest. Then we've got Benedict, Colin, Daphne, whose book is now because women of the peerage / historical romance typically married younger than men. Then Eloise, Francesca, Gregory, and Hyacinth. And of course their widowed mother, Violet. We should probably also quickly introduce ourselves. So I'm Rudy.
And I'm Kate.
And I'm Adele.
All right, so today we're talking about The Duke and I, written by Julia Quinn, published in the year 2000 by Avon Books. The dedication to Paul reads, "And also for Paul, even though his idea of dancing is standing still while he holds my hand and watches me twirl." Our hero is Simon Arthur Henry Fitzranulph Bassett, first the Earl of Cliveden and later Duke of Hastings. Our heroine is Daphne Bridgerton, fourth of the Bridgerton children. The story begins in April of 1813 in London, England, and our general plot devices include a fake relationships and a forced marriage. I think the thing about revisiting this world and revisiting these books in particular, and I read this book in 2000. I read them. It used to feel like a little birthday present to me because Julia Quinn's books always came out right around my birthday. So I had this little tradition of going to the bookstore and buying the new Julia Quinn book, and that's what I would read on my birthday. I think we have to remember that they're 20 years old, and it's been 20 very big years in terms of changes not only in publishing, but changes in society and culture and what is expected in relationships. And that doesn't mean that I think that we can excuse the things that happen in the book. But I think it can also be read on two levels. And if you read it sort of on a surface level, the book is still incredibly witty. It's still incredibly charming. The characters are really fun. Like the familial relationship is really enjoyable. You can read it on that surface level and just come away thinking this was a really delightful book. It's only when you start reading it on that second level that the disparity between when this book was written and what time this book was written into, and now that we're discussing it in the year 2019, it's on that second level where I think that those discrepancies start really coming out.
Most definitely. I started reading it because I think you recommended it to me, Kate, like about 9 years ago. And that was the first time I met you. And then I read all 8 of the series in probably a very small amount of time. And I didn't remember probably the last 5 at all.
But even like before you kind of consider the themes and all of that kind of stuff, like just the tone of the writing is not what I expected, having read it before. Like, it opens in a very Austen-esque kind of way. Like, the narration is fucking weird. It goes kind of in and out of like, okay, I don't know the terms of stuff, but it's like deep third person, whatever.
Kate's our resident academic.
Come on, be a professional romance person right now, like publisher now.
I think that it leaps between close and distant narration.
Yes.
Yeah, it head hops a lot, whereas in contemporary romances, you really expect to only have the point of view of the two main characters. In this one, you head hop back and forth into, you get Violet's point of view for a paragraph here, you get Lady Danbury's point of view for another paragraph here, and you get omniscient a fair amount, which is really unusual in romance novels, particularly sort of in the last 10 years. It's very, very unusual to have that omniscient point of view as well. So yeah, it does sort of leap in and out. But when it comes to technical aspects like that, I mean, as an editor, it drives me crazy, and I will fix it whenever I can. But I think if a book can work with that sort of head hopping and that sort of change between the close and the distant and the omniscient and the third person, and you don't notice as a reader, it doesn't throw you out of the story, then you can't really say that a story doesn't work.
I mean, I just was kind of, I was surprised because most of the books I read don't do this anymore. Or like most of the authors I read don't do this anymore. But also the way that it's kind of held up, well, a lot of Julia Quinn's writing is sort of makes these best of lists. Like it really kind of drilled home to me that there is a difference between like technically good and enjoyable. And I'm not like, that's not to be like mean about it or rude about it. It just was, I was like, oh, okay, this is not technically a good book, but I fucking love it. Like, yeah.
Well, the tone jumps all over the shop. The family stuff is quite farcical and slapstick and
my god, so much, right?
I love it though. Like, how often do you get just amazing bits of characterization just because you're having so many siblings interact with each other, and yet you have these really sweet scenes with Daphne and Simon because he basically falls for her straight away. And then, you know, they have these really melodramatic sections of the book where everyone's in a rage state. So particularly the brothers who, you know, if you probably put all the Bridgerton books back to back, the Bridgerton brothers are probably in a rage state 97% of the time. And we should probably do a nose punch count, like, for the whole series.
Oh, because Simon ends up with like two black eyes within like less than 24 hours. Like,
can I just say that I love that wedding scene of them giggling while they're kissing because, you know, Hyacinth is tossing flowers everywhere and Gregory is sneezing, and it just, you know, it feels a bit more lived in than quite a starchy vision of what you think a historical romance is like if you actually haven't read any. So
yeah, I think that's part of the reason why Julia Quinn endures in a way that other writers who've been writing for just as long don't feel as relevant anymore. And that's because in all of her books, even, I mean, there are some scenes in here that are super dark, like really dark. But when it comes to actually creating that romantic relationship, she doesn't forget that falling in love should be fun. Like being in love with somebody should be fun. And in a lot of cases, romance novels that are sort of written more recently, falling in love, being sexually attracted to somebody is treated as if it should be an incredibly serious thing at all times. And, you know, you should be conflicted or just so caught up in your lust that you can't think about anything else. And it becomes this incredibly laser focused, almost obsession, where with these books, and particularly with this one, it recognizes that no, actually you can be in love and still be having fun together. And there's something really disarming about that. There's something incredibly charming about that. So even though, you know, when you're reading through this again and you're bumping up against those things that as a contemporary reader you're not as comfortable with, you're still carried along because there's that element of fun, because there's that element of they're having a good time together. So you as the reader are having a good time watching them or reading about them, I guess. I feel like that we should address the very first time that we meet our namesake, Lady Danbury.
Yes.
In the ballroom with all four, I guess the first four Bridgerton siblings, all of them together at once.
I think I love the the entrance of Lady Danbury because it's speaking of dragons, and then it's straight into this description of her marching across the ballroom with her cane. And you can imagine it straight away too, because we've all know like an older relative that's kind of like that. And that these like three giant men and this quite forceful woman are all like, oh God, is just a fabulous vision.
Lady Danbury is who I aspire to be to a certain degree, because she's like, she's so fucking rough.
I like that Simon is her nephew. It's also the first time that we sort of see Lady Danbury as an excellent judge of character, where she comes in and she says, you know, I always liked you, to Daphne. You've got a really good mind. And then reserves judgment on her three brothers, because her three brothers are so cowardly when it comes to facing her in the ballroom.
Well, we stan Danbury, which is also why we've named the podcast after her, because she is a constant throughout all the books, but she's also a constant badass. So
she's very straightforward, and she acts. I know that Lady Whistledown acts as sort of a de facto narrator through the series, but Lady Danbury almost acts like the moral center, I guess. Whatever Lady Danbury is for or against, that's how the reader always ends up as well.
As an inciting factor, the release of Lady Whistledown's papers is freaking genius. Like, to get everyone hooked on it and then make them pay.
Do you know what I noticed that I don't think I had noticed the first few times I've read it? Is that Simon never gets into it. And it's because like he kind of misses the thing when it first happens. But I thought that was really interesting about him, that he's like so anti-establishment. He's not going to play this like stupid game that everybody else is in. And but it just felt really true to who he is.
But then in the end, in the epilogue, of course, he is reading it, and we have a beautiful little circle around to Lady Violet's reaction in the very opening pages, where she's freaking out about how Lady Whistledown knows things. And then at the epilogue, Simon is freaking out about how Lady Whistledown knows things. So there's that nice little continuity all the way through. So he may be anti-establishment and holding himself apart from society at the beginning and through the course of the book, but that by the time we get to the epilogue, he's well and truly immersed in the relationship, in society, in Whistledown. Yeah, he absolutely comes in from the cold.
We're so clever. We worked that out.
For someone who's been so alone, he has a really warped perception of himself. And we see many instances of him being incredibly kind. So he dances with Penelope.
That's when I fell in love with Simon. It's just this really throwaway line at the end of the chapter of that ball where, you know, Violet's super excited because Daphne danced with the Duke and she's all excited, you know, to lord it over Lady Featherington. And then like the very last line of the chapter is, what is he doing dancing with Penelope Featherington? And I was like, oh, Simon. Yeah. All right, I'm there.
He talks to Daphne about all these sort of social events he doesn't like going to, but he doesn't want to disappoint his friends' wives.
I know.
And I just think that was a really, like, it spoke to his character so beautifully. And it wasn't even something he really wanted to admit. I just thought that was really... He's so alone, and then he's thrust into the least alone situation you could ever be in, which is the Bridgertons.
Now that we've all fallen in love with Simon, should we talk about Daphne? Because she is... do you remember when I said that you can read these books on 2 levels? Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting because I remember really liking Daphne. I remember really liking Daphne. I remember thinking that what she does wasn't okay. And, you know, 20 years later, I still think it's really okay. I'm sure we're going to discuss that at great length in a minute. But one of the things that I found really interesting on my reread is Daphne is set up as this person who everybody thinks of as a friend, and they all think that she's super normal. And she knows every trick in the book because she grew up with so many brothers. So, you know, you can't really pull wool over her eyes. But on the reread, Daphne is manipulative as fuck. And I don't know if she does it on purpose or if it's just part of her personality, or even if it's just, the only way that she knows how to get through the world, having all of those brothers or all of those family. But she manipulates Simon like a pro, even
Like
from the very
what?
beginning. Like when they go out into the garden in the inciting incident that leads to the forced marriage, Simon is like, we can't go walking in the garden. That's a terrible idea. And Daphne's like, of course we can go walking in the garden. It's a great idea. And Simon's like, no, terrible idea. Very bad. Very not good. And Daphne's like, fine, I'm going to go walking by myself then. Are you going to let me walk in the garden by myself? And Simon's like, fuck.
Oh,
You have to be
see,
a gentleman.
I mean, I get where you're building to, but it's this I'm really struggling with it because, like, there is a lot of instances where, nah, do you know what? You do your thing, and then I will.
So she lures him out to the garden, and then she finds herself a dark corner. And Simon, basically only ends up following her because she can't go walking in the garden by herself, essentially, because it would be dangerous and damaging to her reputation. And then, of course, they end up kissing, and that's when Anthony finds them and forces her to get married, which Simon, of course, doesn't agree to do at first. He refuses, and Anthony challenges him to a duel. And Daphne gets Colin to bring her to the dueling place the next morning, where she manipulates Simon into marrying her, basically by saying, we were seen in the garden. If you don't marry me, then my life is going to be ruined. You have to save me.
And she exaggerates how many people actually know.
She does exaggerate.
Look, I can't not say this. The other alternative was that he allows his friend to shoot him dead.
Well, I'm not saying that they were good alternatives.
But it's like a little bit hard to kind of set this as she's manipulated him when it's like she can either tell him this lie or she can let him die a martyr. Like it's a fucked up situation. And look, if it was me, I'm there with Daphne. I'm like, I respect her choice. I respect her lie.
Everyone else's opinion is a starting point for negotiation. Like,
that's her.
You down.
I think what's kind of difficult for me is that, like, I mean, yes, because there's definitely a pattern of Simon will say something and she will in her head go, okay, but I know your feelings better. And like, that's a fucked up thing, right? Like, obviously that's a fucked up thing to do, to kind of sit back and say, I, as someone who's known you an entire, I think at this point, 2 weeks, absolutely understand you on an emotional level better than you understand yourself. What I have a problem with, though, is that, like, there are countless romance heroes who do this, and they don't get as much flack as Daphne gets. Like, when it comes to, like, it sits wrong with me. I'm like, oh, if we were going to do this to every book that was written 20 years ago, like, that's how they work. Like, that's how those romance novels of that era work.
I think she's someone who just convinces herself that she's correct all the time, even if she knows maybe she's not.
But she's validated by the rest of it. Like, that's the actual, like, difficult part of it all, because turns out that he does love her. Actually, he does want to kiss her and follow her into a garden. He does want to marry her. He does eventually want to have her babies.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that it really comes to a head in the scene where essentially Daphne rapes Simon. He comes back after a massive argument. He's absolutely drunk off his head. He ends up falling asleep in her room. She notices that he is erect. I think there's like a throwaway line like, I didn't know men could get erect in their sleep or whatever. And there's a line in there that says she could have whatever she wants. And by this point in time, it's incredibly well established through the course of the story that what she wants more than anything is a child. She's figured it out by this point in time that the reason that Simon ejaculates on the sheets and not in her body is because that's the way to keep from having kids. So she's put everything together, and she makes the decision to take advantage of the fact that he is inebriated and he isn't fully in control of his own body. And she has sex, and she's had sex with him. And, you know, when he's getting close to finishing, she holds on. She holds on, and she doesn't get off him, even though he sort of makes movements to try and get away from her. She basically just bears down with all her might to keep him inside of her. And they both talk about it afterwards in different ways that you know, back away from the fact that realistically it was a rape scene. You know, she sort of talks about, you know, her reasons for doing it, and Simon himself says that, you know, he probably could have really pushed her off if he had tried. And then he follows on eventually and says, you know, he's not mad about the fact that she did it. It was more that she had, you know, not listened to what he wanted. I think when it comes to this discussion about it being 20 years on from when the book was written, this was the scene that really cemented that things have changed an awful lot since this book was written, and that the book as it's written now would never float in the market today.
I think there's a lot of word count that is plugged into him verbally wanting it whilst he's incredibly intoxicated. Mm-hmm. And even he says, well, that he didn't push her off. If you put any of those thoughts in the mind of a female identifying character or someone that didn't have power in the relationship, like, I think it's quite distressing actually reading it.
I mean, I guess the thing for me is that I am thinking about like the way that it kind of sits within. I don't actually think there's a romance canon, but like I don't know what else to call it. But like the way that it sits within that, and the idea of forced seductions, like quote unquote, and also because I think that there's definitely it's really hard for me to explain where I'm coming from without it sounding like victim blaming bullshit, because you're right, a lot of what I'm about to say I would actually not want to hear anybody say, in that like I guess I would like it to be a little bit clearer that she doesn't get him drunk, he comes home drunk. They also both go to sleep first. Like she wakes up a little bit later and realizes that like he's got an erection, and then when she tries to get out of bed, he pulls her back. Like there's a lot more action on his part sort of in the build up, which is why it's like, this is why it's such a complex scene to me. Like it just, and that it ties back into what the rest of the book has been telling us. She knows his feelings better. She understands him better than he understands himself because she loves him so much. So like
they've been married 2 weeks at this point.
I know. So they've known, so Adele, they've known each other for 4 weeks. Okay. Like she really understands him.
True love.
I think you make some really good points. I think you make some super important points too when it comes to talking about romance as a contract, I guess, between the writer and the reader. I want to make 2 points. The first is, I think you're quite right. I don't think that the sex is non-consensual.
It's coercive.
Is it like the opposite of like sleuthing? She kind of sleuths.
Well, yeah. So the term, as I understand it, is reproductive coercion. So like,
reproductive coercion.
That's what I understand it to be, which predominantly it is men who are reproductive coercing women, which is like, so taking a condom off without their partner's consent or knowledge, swapping out birth control pills for things like Tic Tacs. like it's often played for laughs when those stories come about, because there's Ian Somerhalder did like this interview where he talked about how he consistently threw out his wife's contraception pills and replaced them
I
for
did
Tic
not
Tacs.
need to know that, because I think that he is like the hottest man that has ever lived on Earth, and now he's ruined.
I mean, yeah.
Whereas I feel confirmed that he's smirky. And yuck.
I
know,
loved
but
him,
do you remember
and now
that scene?
yeah.
Do you remember that scene in the Vampire Diaries where he dances? Like, that gif just makes me happy on my worst days.
Yeah, oh, sorry to have ruined him for you.
No.
I think we do cut Daphne a lot of slack because she's a female. I think if there was a gender flip, we would be like, hell's no, straight away. I think...
Well, I think the second... Sorry, we wandered a little bit away from my second point, which was, as Rudy says, this is all happening within the context of a romance novel. So when you go into the novel, you understand that the couple is going to end up deliriously happy at the end. That's the promise that is made, you know, when you pick up a romance novel. That's the promise that the author has made to the reader. And it is done in this context of Simon not understanding how families work, Simon not understanding how love works, Simon being so lonely, Simon being so caught up in this argument with his father that he can't see straight. And we have Daphne out here who, you know, is wearing her emotional intelligence cap and being able to see through all of those four things to try and guide Simon from his poor, sad, lonely existence to his, you know, happy family, lots of people existence. And so this scene happens in the context of Simon needs a real kick in the pants to get out of that mindset and into this new mindset. And this is sort of the first step, which doesn't make it okay, but within that context of the story and within that context of the safety of being within the novel, I think we cut slack in that regard as well, because we, as readers of the genre, we understand that what Daphne is doing in the end is the right thing. It's almost a romance Machiavellian trope.
Because I mean, I guess I just, I was a little concerned that if we go a bit too hard on how terrible and fucked up Daphne's behavior is, it kind of doesn't leave room for people to be like, I actually liked the book and I like Daphne. I'm really aware of the fact that neither of you are cursing and I am. And I just, what is with this?
Excuse me, true. I said Daphne was manipulative as fuck.
Oh, okay.
She did.
I take it back then.
I did, however, not use any dirty words around Simon's ejaculation, which I don't know why I just leaned into that. It felt very strange, though.
Do you feel for the household staff having to clean that every fucking day?
I know, and like how much sex they were having. Like those sheets would have had to be changed. God, like every couple of hours.
No, they didn't have them back then.
Well, especially because, I mean, Simon's wet spot would have been bigger than normal, right? As somebody...
It just, like, the mattress would be screwed, like, literally.
Also, like, poor Daphne is a virgin when, you know, on her wedding night. And even for those of us who are not virgins, like, that much sex without, I might add, KY jelly being a thing that you can get in Regency England, like, the poor woman. There would have been chafing. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, Violet has some amazing scenes in this book. There's the scene where Simon and Daphne reconcile and she drags her son off by the ear after browbeating all three of the elder brothers. And that's just exquisite.
And she's so fearless, except when it comes to talking about sex with her daughter. I love the part where Daphne says, so you did this 8 times. And her Violet just freaks out.
Also, Daphne retelling that to Simon and Simon's reaction to it, which is normally a bit more muted. He can't even respond. The gumption.
Oh, poor Daphne calling Simon impotent, isn't it? She says that he's impotent.
But it is a terrible birds and the bees talk. It's just...
Yeah. Look, I had a terrible birds and the bees talk the first time I asked anyone, which was my grandmother, who told me that babies come out of a flower that grows out of your belly button.
Oh my God.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
that's gross misinformation.
Yeah, that was really confusing for a very long time, friends. Very confusing for a very long time. But I think even that was a little bit more straightforward than what Violet manages to not say to poor Daphne.
My dad was entirely too straightforward at the dinner table when I decided to ask. You will be shocked to know that I was somewhat of a troll as a child. Which is why, look, honestly, I think out of all of the Bridgertons, I love Hyacinth. She is, yeah. I have so much affection for her as a character.
Kate, Rudy, what is your what the Featherington moment in The Duke and I?
So mine is something that you guys kind of were laughing about, but like made me really fucking sad. No. My what the Featherington moment is like no one bothering to tell Daphne how reproduction works. Like that she had to find that out after she was married, after she's lost her virginity from a housekeeper? Like that that made me fucking
so
sad. I just was like, and it also, Courtney Milan has a novella called A Kiss for Midwinter, but it's like, it's the doctor and one of the best friends of a heroine from a previous book. And so they have this little novella, and like the heroine in this book had been kind of tricked into becoming pregnant because when she was really fucking young. And they talk about like, I'm ruining how to explain this. She says, like, she talks about how she was really naive at the time when she had this like secret affair with this like guy who got her pregnant. And the doctor, who is the hero, he gets progressively more angry as he listens to the story, because he's like, there were people who withheld information about her own body and didn't bother to inform her. Like, that's what made her, like, that's what makes him angry. And when I was sitting there and like, yeah, and kind of going, how messed up is it that this poor, like, this woman is in her 20s and I can't remember how old she is. Daphne,
I think she's just 20. So when were people normally, they were normally introduced to society sort of around 17, 18, right? So she'd be 19 or 20.
I think she's specifically, yeah, she's not a teenager, that much I remember. So she probably is like 20, 21 at the most. And I was like, bless her fucking heart. Like, maybe this is why I have so much kind of, I'm willing to give her a lot more space.
The Violet stuff is funny because clearly the woman's had a shit ton of sex. But I think it's also sad that someone who has raised 8 children after her husband has died and raised pretty decent human beings can't have an honest, direct conversation with her daughter about what is before her, and hasn't thought about how scary that would be if you didn't know.
Yeah.
And she's such an excellent mother in almost all other regards.
Yeah.
Like, you think that she wouldn't fall down at this one point.
Yeah. So that's I mean, there's a lot of what the Featherington going on in this book, but like that was one that I had where I was like,
a Featherington, what the Featherington mention is, why does Mrs. Featherington want her daughters to look shit?
I think it comes up in a later book. So technically, I guess this is spoilers, but she dresses her kids in happy colors because men want happy wives. And it turns out that Philippa and what's Prudence? Is it Prudence? Prudence and Philippa look all right in like oranges and yellows, and poor Penelope
she just doesn't have the color.
Looks like citrus fruit. I think she's described as.
So Violet and Mrs. Featherington, I can't remember what her first name is, are so strategic when it becomes about cornering their children and suitors for marriage opportunities. And yet, is it Penelope gets dressed in shit citrus colours because her mum just thinks she's a lost cause?
I think that this is why it works better that the Featherington father is not alive anymore, because I think part of it is it's a sabotage move. If she marries all of her daughters off, who does she have? So I think subconsciously she's sabotaging Penelope. Anyway, good talk, guys. Now it's time for us to do something a little bit different that we call
What Would Danbury Do?
This is where we get favourite characters from other books to write to Lady Danbury for some relationship advice. Because, as we know, she's got opinions. She's pretty free with them. So, this comes from Julian. He's the hero in Mia Sosa's Pretending He's Mine. Dear Lady Danbury, I am letting my best friend's younger sister crash at my place. I've had a crush on her for a while, and I just overheard her masturbating. What should I do?
What would Lady Danbury recommend in this situation? Honestly, I think Lady Danbury would be very upfront. I think she'd be, go knocking on that door and just say, look, walls are really thin. We both need to live here. We both need to be comfortable. Let's show some common courtesy and, I don't know, put a pillow over our heads or something.
I think she'd give some tips. You don't sound like you're enjoying it to the optimum level. Here's some pointers.
Would you like a hand?
You need to really get your rocks off.
Mia Sosa's Pretending He's Mine. It's a fake relationship, which I don't know if we ever properly got into, but Daphne and Simon pretend to be courting, so they aren't going to be hassled by various people that they know. In this is a fake relationship because Ashley, the heroine, has like a big family event coming up, and she doesn't want to be hassled by her family about how single she is and that she's still, like, she kind of doesn't have her life together yet, which is also kind of exemplified by the fact that she's just been kicked out of her share house. So she is crashing with her brother's best friend, Julian. I really enjoyed this book, and so it's a contemporary set in America, so a bit different from Regency historical. But if you like fake dating tropes, Pretending He's Mine is so good. And I actually read Pretending He's Mine kind of in parallel with The Duke and I, because I do tend to read more than one book at once. And it was really interesting to kind of see the ways in which Ashley was kind of the driving force between her and Julian getting together, because he was really resistant to the idea of dating his best friend's sister. But also he's like the one who's recognizing sort of special things in her, which is a lot like Simon and Daphne. Simon's really, really resistant to pursuing any kind of relationship with Daphne, partly because it's his best friend's sister, but also partly just because, he doesn't want to get married. He has issues, whatever. We've talked about it. But he recognizes elements of Daphne that other people don't. And so there's, if you were looking for a more contemporary and a much more recently released book, but still sort of in the same vein, Mia Sosa.
That's all for this episode of What Would Danbury Do? We'll be back in a fortnight with the Viscount Who Loved Me. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram as @BridgertonPod, or send us an email at bridgertonpod @gmail.com. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded land of the Gadigal, Wurundjeri and Boorong people, and edited by our audio producer, Rudy Bremer on Gadigal country. Thanks for listening, and remember, WWDD.